Like many of you, I've been playing the shit out of the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remaster ever since it came out in April. And after playing and finishing the main story, every guild questline, and both the DLCs for Oblivion, this marks the third game made by Bethesda Game Studios that I have played and finished in its entirety. And technically, this is the oldest Bethesda game I've played so far, with the original Oblivion game coming out in 2006, almost 20 years ago. And let me tell you right now, even though this game is almost 20 years old, this is the best Bethesda game I've played so far. Now you may ask, how can that be? I mean, aside from a graphics overhaul, this Oblivion Remaster is largely the same game as the original one that was released in 2006. This means that this game features 20-year-old combat systems, progression systems, world design, and quest design. And yet, even without the blinders of nostalgia, this is still the best Bethesda game I've ever played. The combat is pretty basic, the world does tend to feel empty sometimes between the points of interest, and the progression system is kind of weird and nonsensical, but this game excels in two of the most important aspects of what makes an RPG an RPG. Those two things are story and quest design. Now, if these two things were on the same level as Fallout 4 and Starfield, without a doubt, this game would be worse than both those games in every way. But they're not. In fact, they are leagues better in those two aspects, and in my opinion, fully make up for some of the jank that comes with the other systems present in the game. The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion just showed me what the golden age of Bethesda looked like, why people consider Bethesda and Todd Howard to be pioneers in the Western RPG space, and why hundreds of RPGs from hundreds of different developers have come after games like Oblivion and yet have failed to exceed what Bethesda captured with their earlier titles. Today, let's talk about the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, Fallout 4, and Starfield. Let's talk about what made Bethesda's older games like Oblivion so good, and why Bethesda themselves have failed to live up to the expectations set by some of their older games. And let's ultimately answer the question, will Bethesda ever make a game like this again? Now, like I mentioned in the intro, the two key differences I see between Oblivion and their newer titles like Fallout 4 and Starfield are within the story and the quest design of these games. And while those are two aspects of the game that typically go hand in hand with each other, I think there's enough different about these two aspects that warrant a separate discussion of both. Let's start with the story. Now, if you pay attention to game discussions online, especially around RPGs and Bethesda, you know that the general sentiment for newer Bethesda games is that certain aspects within the RPG elements of their newer games have been dumbed down and more streamlined. Many people point to the guild quests in their older games and how many times it felt as though there was a genuine interaction between each of the guilds, and being part of some guilds and not others affected the potential endings for their guild quest lines, and how in the newer games like Starfield, that sort of interaction just isn't a thing. I'm here to tell you, with those nostalgia blinders off, that not much has changed in this regard from Oblivion to Starfield. Having now played 3 Bethesda games from 3 different decades, their guild questlines largely have kept the same format. Bethesda's guild questlines always tend to be self-contained within the guild itself, with not much room for interaction between all the guilds. For example, being a part of both the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood in Oblivion did not affect the game in a certain way at all when it absolutely should have. The Thieves Guild in Oblivion is very notorious for not taking innocent lives. They always pride themselves as being thieves and not murderers. And well, the Dark Brotherhood are essentially bloodthirsty contract killers making a literal living off killing innocent people. And yet, you can be a part of both, doing quests for both, and not have a single consequence thrown your way. The same is true for a game like Starfield, where being a Freestar Collective Ranger and a UC Vanguard member literally means nothing, even though they technically diametrically oppose one another. In fact, the game that was the best at this sort of faction interaction was Fallout 4. In Fallout 4, the main quest tied into the faction quests, and you had to choose to eliminate one of the factions that was present in the game. Okay, so if it's not the interaction itself between the various quest lines, which is one of the most common sources of complaint between the Bethesda and RPG community, what could it be? While the interactions between the quest lines haven't necessarily changed from game to game, it is a symptom of a larger shift that has been happening from game to game. And that's the overall believability of the story, the ludonarrative dissonance, if you will. Ludonarrative dissonance is the direct contrast between a game's story and how the indirect way a game tells its story through its gameplay is shown. Now, Bethesda games are all sci-fi, fantasy, or space epics. They aren't necessarily meant to be some of the most believable and grounded stories the world has ever seen. Bethesda isn't attempting to have a story as deep or as nuanced as a story like in Red Dead Redemption 2, but some aspect of groundedness within a story is always necessary, and a lot of times, this need falls to the characters within a story and the dialogue that accompanies them. Now, this is an aspect of Bethesda games that has without a doubt become worse as the years have gone on. Characters in Bethesda games have kinda always been shallow. I mean, Martin Septim in Oblivion, the supposed successor to Uriel Septim, king of the Empire in Tamriel, a massive deal within this world, isn't necessarily any more fleshed out or deep as a character compared to, say, Nick Valentine in Fallout 4 or Sarah Morgan in Starfield. But this sort of basic character development also works for a game like Oblivion because Oblivion as a game never attempts to go deeper with these characters. Every single character in Elder Scrolls Oblivion is a bona fide quest giver, nothing more, nothing less. The NPCs that you talk to don't really know much about you, and you don't really know much about them. The only time you ever interact on a somewhat deeper level is through certain quests within the game. Newer games like Fallout 4 and Starfield keep this level of shallowness within their character design and dialogue, but commit a massive sin in terms of gameplay that completely shatters any sort of believability or acceptable ludonarrative dissonance. And this gameplay mechanic is the companion system. You see, in Oblivion, you don't ever really have any companions to accompany you on your travels. You can sometimes recruit NPCs to follow you, but those companions have little to no dialogue and are really only there to help you in battle. They don't have morality systems or any sort of unique quest lines related to them. And that's okay, because every character in Oblivion is pretty shallow. There are also some quests where you're assigned a named companion to take with you, but after that quest is over, they're back to being just a regular NPC. And this is honestly a very good thing, because it allows you, the player, that plausibility that the characters you meet that inhabit this world live their own lives, do their own things, and aren't only there to serve your every whim, desire, and need. Another great game that does this is Cyberpunk 2077. Characters like Panam and Judy are with you during certain quests, but the majority of time they are not with you. This allows for you to think of their character in your head as someone who has a life outside of just being there for V. With the introduction of named companions in Fallout 4 and Starfield, this illusion that people in this world live outside of just only to serve you, the player, completely vanishes. And this is because, like I mentioned at the beginning of this segment, the level of depth for each of these characters hasn't really changed from game to game. When a character like Sarah Morgan or Nick Valentine is with you 24/7 as a companion, that character shallowness starts to become much more apparent and much more tiresome to deal with. When Sarah's with you 24/7 and you've exhausted every dialogue option with her for the 10th time, and she doesn't eat, and she doesn't sleep, and all she does is follow you around like a lost puppy, that potential narrative you had built up in your head about the life Sarah had before you met her completely vanishes. Because how can you possibly believe the game when it tells you that Sarah had a life before this in the UC Vanguard, and that she lost many of her fellow Vanguard members in a battle, and that this still haunts her to this day, when she literally shows none of that emotion in her 5 recycled lines that she says when you keep her as a companion. What I mean by all this is that when you decide to include a game mechanic like a companion system within your game, the level of depth a character needs to have to feel believable increases exponentially. You will be with these characters 24/7, and so it's important that the amount of dialogue that they have and the level of depth to their backstory and what they believe in and how their morals align or misalign with your actions within the game is incredibly detailed and nuanced. Characters like Nick Valentine, Sarah Morgan, Piper, Barrett, Martin Septum, and many more are totally fine as characters if you want to keep them as non-assignable companions. None of these characters are particularly very deep or have incredibly nuanced morals, but that's totally fine because you wouldn't be with them for 50 to 60 hours in a playthrough. However, the second you decide that you want these characters to be companions that the player can take around with them wherever they go, it's time to up that level of complexity. A great example of companions within an RPG is Avowed. Now, I didn't love Avowed, but one thing that I can absolutely commend the game on is the companions that your character gets to pick from. From one, there are only 5 companions you can pick from, and each one has unique abilities, morals, and how they think you should be operating within the main story. This allows you to have incredibly deep and nuanced conversations with these characters at your camp whenever you go there. These characters are with you all the time, but how they react to the world around them, what their thoughts are on where they are at any given time, and what they think about the decisions you've made throughout the story so far are always unique and varied between each companion. That just simply isn't true for Fallout 4 and Starfield, and it's the reason why many people consider these games to be a step back story-wise compared to older titles. Alright, so we've talked in depth about the dialogue in newer BGS titles and how it compares to their older titles. Let's talk about the second aspect that I mentioned, the quest design. Now, when it comes to quest design, I think the theme that has predominantly prevailed in newer BGS titles is the lack of dynamism within quests. What I mean by this is that quests are primarily linear, with quest givers asking you to go there and do that thing. On top of that, quests don't really feature many alternate endings within each quest. There's a distinct lack of choice within a quest as well, and that's coupled with the fact that unexpected consequences have essentially been removed from quests in newer BGS titles. To illustrate my point, I want to break down 2 examples from Oblivion that I think perfectly encapsulate what I'm talking about. The first example is during the main quest in Oblivion, where the first Oblivion Gate opens up in Kvatch. Now, during this quest, after you close the Oblivion Gate that's blocking the entrance to the main city, a completely optional quest opens up, allowing you to go further into the city and help the guards retake the city from the Daedra currently occupying it. Right there is where the quest dynamism starts. Having this quest be optional is so cool because it allows you to roleplay as the character you built out. If your character is incredibly heroic and altruistic, they will absolutely help out the people of Kvatch and ensure that the Daedra cannot terrorize them again. However, if you're roleplaying as someone who's more sinister, or is maybe a no-nonsense type of person that only cares about their main objective of finding Martin Septum, you wouldn't particularly care to help those people fighting against the Daedra in Kvatch. This type of dynamism and optional main quests just aren't really present in Starfield or Fallout 4, and so because of this, everyone's character, regardless of how they actually want their characters to act, are funneled into the same story beats and the same personality more or less. But it goes further than this. If you decide to take the optional quest, there's a named NPC who is willing to help you fight back the Daedra, a commander of the city guard who is willing to lay his life on the line to help you. And you can take his help, and the fight against the Daedra becomes easier. But if you don't pay attention and you don't help him out enough, he can absolutely die in combat. You'll get a little pop-up in the quest log that says that he's died and that you'll have to continue without him, making the fight significantly harder. To me, this level of dynamism is super cool because the game makes it clear that my actions that I do in the game have consequences. I should have protected that NPC, but I didn't, and now the fight is going to be tougher for me. This type of stuff just isn't present in Bethesda's newer games, and it really prevents the player, like me and you, from immersing ourselves into the character we've built and truly roleplay in a role-playing game. The second example I want to talk about is during the Shivering Isles DLC. During one of the main quests, I was tasked on figuring out who a traitor was. I had no direction on what to do, and all I was told was to go out and ask the people of Crucible, one of the towns in Shivering Isles. It was up to me on who I asked and how I wanted to approach it. There were no quest markers or directions or anything indicating there was one person I needed to talk to, and I loved that. Again, this lack of direction is crucial in a game like this because it allows you to learn about things organically. During some of my conversations with the NPCs around town, I became aware of a couple of side quests that I can complete as well. And because of this, I naturally got distracted by completing those before I continued asking around town for the traitor. It's little things like this that really sell a player on the immersion within the world and the role-playing aspects that come with it. Now, you could argue that some of this dynamism within the game is simply because Oblivion is 20 years old, and back then there just wasn't the technology or the need for safeguards around certain quests and features. And this could absolutely be true. There were ways for you to completely break your main quest if someone important was to die during a quest or by your hand when they were necessary to advance the quest. And yes, while that sort of thing could be annoying to deal with, there are saves in a game for a reason. Backing up a couple of saves might suck by losing some gameplay, but if that's the price to pay for more open level and quest design, so be it. But there is a way to keep all this dynamism while keeping modern safeguards that don't let you brick your save because of a choice you made earlier in the game. And a game that came out this year balances this idea perfectly. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. And if you pay attention to the discourse around this game on the internet, you know that many people consider this as a modern Bethesda-like game. And you see, when I first played KCD 2, I didn't really see the resemblance. At that point, I hadn't played Oblivion yet, and so my only points of reference for what BGS games were supposed to play like were Fallout 4 and Starfield. The amazing amount of choice, dynamism, and dialogue within each quest in KCD 2 was just something that I hadn't seen in a BGS game before, and so I thought that people wanted BGS to make a game like KCD 2, not that BGS had already made a game that was similar in systems and features to KCD 2. I felt this way until I played Oblivion, and I realized that Bethesda games used to have amazing choice and dynamism within their quests, and somewhere along the way, this was lost to them in their newer games. All KCD 2 did was revive some of those concepts that were already present in previous BGS games. Now, KCD 2 is way more hardcore with some of these systems than Bethesda ever was, but the concepts and what these systems set out to accomplish for the player are all still the same. Having multiple endings to even something as simple as side quests and seeing those effects ripple out to the rest of the game, or allowing certain NPCs to die within quests, changing the way the player can approach any one encounter, or not including explicit directions on what to do and where to go for certain quests to allow the player to get lost, are all things that KCD 2 does so well and something that older Bethesda games like Oblivion also used to do. While some of these systems may feel hardcore and may turn off certain casual gamers, I think that KCD 2 showed that for the vast majority of people, these sort of systems are welcome and even encouraged. People want to get lost in games, even if it's sometimes frustrating. And I think Bethesda, in the interest of appealing to everyone, dumbed down their quest design in hopes of appealing to even the most casual of gamers. But as someone famous probably once said, if you try to appeal to everyone, you appeal to no one. Alright, so it's now time to answer the question, will Bethesda ever make a game like Oblivion again? And based on all the shit that I've said in this long ass video, I think the easy answer would be to say no. I think Bethesda, in the interest of appealing to the largest of audiences, will continue to dumb down certain RPG elements in the interest of the bottom line and sales. But it shouldn't have to be this way, and in fact, it doesn't have to be this way. Bethesda sits in a very unique position that only the top 0.1% of developers around the world sit in. Bethesda is one of, if not the most iconic game development studio of all time. And because of this, even the most casual of gamers are going to buy their next game, no matter what it is. This allows you, as a developer, the leniency to not have to try to appeal to the largest market to get the most sales. You have the brand recognition, and that's going to continue to go away if you keep releasing bland, basic RPGs. Hell, if a game like Elden Ring, the definition of a game with a niche audience, can do as well as it did, I have no doubt in my mind that Elder Scrolls 6 will sell like crazy, even if it's as hardcore as KCD 2. That's what players want, and frankly, that's what players deserve after waiting a decade and a half for the next entry in the Elder Scrolls series. So to answer the question one more time, will Bethesda ever make a game like Oblivion again? Unfortunately, I don't think so. There's something so comforting and nostalgic about a game like Oblivion, even though this was my first time ever playing it. Something about the game only having like 5 voice actors voicing every character in the game, or the incredibly goofy way all the NPCs look, and the weird Bethesda jank in the combat and progression is all things that can't really be replicated again. But Bethesda doesn't have to make a game like Oblivion or a game like Skyrim again, because to me, a game like Starfield was so close to being great if they had just nailed the actual RPG part of the game. Hopefully, Bethesda takes their time, listens to the feedback from gamers, and creates a game worthy of being a successor to some of the most iconic games of all time. But only time will tell. Either way, that's going to do it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this type of content, make sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing to see more content like this. Let me know what you think about the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remaster, what you like about it, what you didn't like about it, and if you think Bethesda can pull their head out of their asses and create something great for Elder Scrolls 6. Personally, I would like to think that they can. Todd Howard, for all his faults, is still a very genius game developer and director, and I think he's got one more in him before he signs off. But yeah, guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Either way, it's been CGG. I'm out.